The Pacific War, fought between the Allied forces, primarily the United States, and the Empire of Japan, spanned the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean and involved a series of intense, brutal battles on islands scattered across the region. One of the lesser-known yet significant campaigns of the Pacific War was the battles for the islands of Peleliu and Angaur, part of the Palau Islands. These engagements, fought in 1944, exemplified the grueling nature of the island-hopping campaign and highlighted the fierce resistance put up by Japanese forces. While the campaigns for Peleliu and Angaur may not be as widely recognized as major battles like Iwo Jima or Okinawa, they were crucial in the broader Allied strategy to advance toward Japan, ultimately contributing to the collapse of the Japanese military. Strategic importance of Peleliu and Angaur. The Palau Islands were strategically located in the western Pacific, between the Philippines and the Japanese-held territories in the Central Pacific. By 1944, the United States had begun a series of island-hopping campaigns aimed at eliminating key Japanese positions and establishing bases from which they could launch attacks toward Japan and other vital territories, such as the Philippines. Peleliu, the largest of the Palau Islands, was seen as a particularly important target for the Allied forces due to its well-developed airfields and its proximity to the Philippines, which the Allies intended to retake. The Japanese had heavily fortified Peleliu with a network of underground bunkers, tunnels and artillery positions, knowing the island's strategic significance. Likewise, the smaller island of Angaur was also fortified, though it was considered less critical than Peleliu. Still, the capture of both islands was deemed necessary to ensure complete control over the Palau group and to eliminate any potential Japanese threats to the upcoming Allied operations in the Philippines. Prelude to the battle, Operation Stalemate 2. In the summer of 1944, after a successful series of operations in the Marianas Islands, the Allies set their sights on the Palau Islands. The assault on Peleliu and Angaur was part of Operation Stalemate 2, which aimed to capture these islands to use as forward bases for the coming invasion of the Philippines. While the Allies had learned much from previous amphibious assaults, the terrain and Japanese defenses on Peleliu presented unique challenges that would lead to one of the most difficult and costly campaigns in the Pacific. The battle for Peleliu was a joint operation between U.S. Marine Corps units and Army forces, while the battle for Angaur primarily involved Army forces. The operation began with a massive aerial bombardment and naval shelling of the islands to soften up Japanese defenses. However, despite this heavy bombardment, the Japanese forces had constructed an intricate system of caves, tunnels, and hidden gun positions, which minimized the effectiveness of the pre-invasion bombardment. The fierce Japanese determination to hold the islands would lead to a grueling battle of attrition that would last for several weeks. The Battle of Peleliu. On September 15, 1944, U.S. Marines landed on the beaches of Peleliu, supported by a massive naval and air assault. The initial landings were met with heavy resistance, as the Japanese defenders, under the command of Major General Kunio Nakagawa, had fortified the island with extensive defensive positions. The Japanese forces on Peleliu included roughly 10,000 soldiers, many of whom were members of the elite Japanese Imperial Army, including the 14th Division. The Marines were initially confident that they would overcome the Japanese defenders quickly. However, the dense coral ridges, caves, and entrenched positions caused significant delays. The Marines found themselves pinned down by Japanese gunfire, and progress was slow. The Japanese troops, who had been preparing for an Allied invasion for months, utilized the island's rugged terrain to their advantage. Their defense was further bolstered by a system of caves and tunnels, which made it difficult for the Allies to neutralize them. One of the most difficult parts of the battle for Peleliu was the fight for the Point, a heavily fortified area on the island where the Japanese had concentrated a large portion of their forces. The Americans found it difficult to dislodge the entrenched defenders, and the battle became a war of attrition, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Over the following weeks, the battle continued, and the Marines slowly gained ground. It took more than 2 months to secure the entire island, and the battle was not declared over until November 27, 1944. The battle for Peleliu was one of the bloodiest in the Pacific, with the U.S. Marines suffering nearly 10,000 casualties, including over 1,800 killed. The Japanese losses were catastrophic, with nearly all of the defenders killed in action. The prolonged resistance was attributed to the Japanese military's doctrine of fighting to the death, as well as the island's natural defenses. The battle for Peleliu, which had initially been anticipated to be a swift operation, became a costly and exhausting campaign, with the U.S. forces learning the hard lesson that the Japanese were willing to defend their positions to the last man. The Battle of Angaur. While Peleliu was the primary focus of the operation, the smaller island of Angaur, located to the south, also became a critical point of contention. Angaur was seen as a stepping stone in the capture of Peleliu, and its importance lay in its airfields, which would provide the Allies with additional air support for their continued operations in the region. The battle for Angaur began on September 17, 1944, 2 days after the landings on Peleliu. The island was defended by a much smaller force of approximately 1,400 Japanese soldiers, who had dug in and prepared for a determined defense. The American forces consisted primarily of the 81st Infantry Division, tasked with capturing the island. Unlike Peleliu, the Japanese defenses on Angaur were not as extensive, and the fighting was relatively shorter. The battle for Angaur, while fierce, did not see the same level of prolonged resistance as Peleliu. By September 22, just 5 days after the initial landings, the island was declared secure, although mop-up operations continued for several more weeks to eliminate remaining pockets of resistance. The victory at Angaur was a key part of the overall success of the operation, providing the Allies with the necessary airfields and a solid base of operations to support future attacks in the Philippines. Aftermath and significance. The Allied victory at Peleliu and Angaur was strategically important, but the battles came at a high cost. The prolonged and costly engagement on Peleliu raised questions about the necessity of the operation, as many believed the island did not hold as much strategic value as originally thought. However, the battle demonstrated the tenacity of the Japanese military and the difficulties faced by the Allied forces in their island-hopping campaign. The capture of Peleliu and Angaur allowed the Allies to secure important airfields that would play a critical role in the liberation of the Philippines, a major objective in the war against Japan. The lessons learned in the brutal campaigns of Peleliu and Angaur would inform future amphibious operations, particularly in Okinawa and Iwo Jima.